conservation starts with habitat protection. The next thing is animal protection. Okay, but now we have that. How do we multiply the animals that's already endangered, the animals that's already on the critical list? But if we can multiply them, or we can create genetic diversity by moving genetics from one area to the other area through assisted reproduction without having to move the whole animal, taking the animal out of its environment and bringing him to the next environment. I know that there's only 2 Northern White Rhinos left in the world. 2 Northern White Rhinos, okay? 2 females. Only way that we ever can multiply them is if we use semen that has been stored through assisted reproductive technology and then do in vitro fertilization on them using the Southern White Rhino.
Welcome to Straight Talk, where we cut through the BS and get straight into real conversations with some of the best minds on the planet. I am your host, Af Morne. I am blessed to be leading these extraordinary discussions and asking tough questions that then elicit insightful answers, accelerating our awareness of the biggest issues. Today we have yet again an incredible guest, and one who I have been very inspired by, and an issue and a topic that is so close to our agenda around climate realism that at the same time it's also very different. It's a subject that we wouldn't ordinarily hear about or speak about. And the title of the subject today is Incredible Breakthroughs to Protect Endangered Species. Incredible breakthroughs to protect endangered species. And the person who is with us today and pioneering this in his own way is a gentleman called Dr. Morné Delaray. And I'm going to call him Morne for the purpose of the show, but he is an absolute authority in this domain. And we're going to talk a lot about him, his story, what he's doing, where the breakthroughs are going to come from, and something that will shake you up at the end of this episode, I can promise you that. So, Morne, welcome to Straight Talk. An absolute pleasure to have you on the show today.
No, thank you very, very much. And thank you for having me. For me, it's an honor and a pleasure.
Yeah, likewise. And I have to say, the conversation I had with you just a few weeks ago, although it was brief, it has thrown up a lot of questions around the state of the planet, the state of species, and caused quite a bit of anxiety in my mind, I have to say, with what you shared with me. And I'm sure with that anxiety, there is also a sense of relief because you're doing what you're doing, of the good work you're doing to protect these many endangered species, which you'll tell us all about today. And while I don't want to give the game away right now, I want to first start by working on understanding who you are. So please tell us about what you do today in your life, and what are you doing that is revolutionary or breakthrough, like for species that we feel are endangered or short in numbers or short in supply. And then I'd like to spend a bit of time around you and your background before we jump into the good work you're doing, because I think you're based in a part of the world, South Africa, that I absolutely love. I've spent a lot of time there, had some of my best breaks with my partner there, experienced the people, the culture, the food, and just the vast expanse of land. And I'd love to know who you are. Who is Morne? How did you get into this game? What's your background? What's your story? Because without a story, we're missing the real oomph, the real magic in what you're doing. So, firstly, what are you doing? Tell us about the work you're doing, and then let's talk about you and Morne, the person, before we get into your work.
I'm a very family man. I love my family. We started off as a family business. Everything we do as a family. My children, my wife. So very, very much part of me is my family. Who I am, what I do is for my family, with my family, etc. In terms of what we do today, I'm trying actually to heal my hip today, but work-wise, I'm trying to do any type of assisted reproduction on endangered species. So functionally, to earn money, I do assisted reproduction on cattle. So I'm a cattle guy basically, and but having that knowledge to utilize it to save endangered species. So we've done work on sable antelope, brown antelope, wildebeest or gnu, buffalo, and the last 5-6 years really tried my hardest to get this assisted reproduction going with rhinos, and to see where we can get to have this in vitro fertilization, cloning type stuff done with rhinos for the sake of conservation and to save rhino species as well.
Right, and of course we're going to unpack that in a moment. So you're in South Africa. Which part of South Africa are you in?
Yes, I am in South Africa, but we come from a small town called Brits, which is close to Pretoria. And I love to talk about Brits because it's really this remarkable little rural town. But there's many sportsmen that comes from Brits, and there's many scientists. A guy that has developed nuclear power for South Africa comes from Brits. There's musicians and singers that comes from this little place, and we're below the Hartbeespoort Dam. And there's a big saying is once you've drank the water of the Hartbeespoort Dam, something changes you. And so yes, it's close to Pretoria, and it's on the southern part of what we call the bushveld. And the bushveld is basically the gateway into the towards Kruger Park and towards the northern part of the country, where you get the wildlife species, the so-called Big Five area as well. And so for me, that is remarkable being situated in that area. That's also just on the northern part of the cattle country as well. So
right.
so geographically, we are very well positioned and to be effective. Okay, South Africa is not very, very big, but if you were, for instance, living in Cape Town, you can maybe work on penguins and a few seabirds and the fynbos as you know it. But that area and the fact that I grew up as a rural boy, I mean, I was on the farm the whole time, either on horseback or catching birds and rescuing animals and stuff. That's how I grew up. My dad is a vet as well, was a vet, sorry, and my mum, she loved plants, and so my whole upbringing in this rural town as a farm boy definitely made me who I am, and my love for nature. On top of it, coming from South Africa, you cannot, even if you grew up in a city, you cannot not love nature, because as soon as you go outside any city, you're part of nature. And that's something that people must understand. Also, coming back to who we are, we're African, and that falls on the palate of a lot of people a bit wrongly, because I'm also white and what they call a Mzungu or a Malungu, or a European. But I'm 12th generation African, so I've got no connections whatsoever anywhere in the world. I mean, for 12 generations, I mean, people are called American, and there are only 2 generations in America. And so I'm very, very much African. And that Africanism of us makes us being part of nature and with nature, and your whole essence, your genes, your blood, everything just is vibrant, passionate for being part of nature, but also helping, assisting, and all the bad stuff that we've done in the past with nature. I mean, the human race. We definitely, in myself, my family, we try our best to save the little bit we can do. And so that is it.
Wow, that's amazing. And I love the 12th generation versus second generation example you gave. I think it's, I think when you're thinking about how you've been conditioned in a certain environment, like you said, you were on horseback, you're comfortable in that environment. I think about the vet from the Western world who hasn't got the background you do. I mean, the sciences are taught in a particular way. Vet sciences are taught in a particular way in a more contained environment, in a more sanitized environment, right? Where your connectivity and interaction with animals is measured, if you want to call it that. It's quite extraordinary. I mean, I've never thought about it, but, for someone who is living and breathing this ecosystem, that's just your ecosystem. I don't think, it feels like it's very natural for you. And how, therefore, you would then connect with species and different animals and different families of animals physically to do your work, maybe a little bit different to someone who's not as comfortable being in the thick of, a whole bunch of different species around them. And I think maybe it feels like that could be a bit of a advantage that you have in the work that you're doing now, and the way you spoke about it when I spoke to you quite a few weeks ago. And so let's migrate to that for a second. So you have started with this amazing childhood and background, and intertwined in your family is this way of living, 12th generation in Africa, in South Africa. And you're now taking your learnings around cattle, and you've extrapolated that out into other species because you think you can make a difference. So for the lay people out there, because of course this is a specialized topic, explain to us firstly, why should people care as to whether there is, the need for any form of reproductive progression in another species? I mean, what's the problem here? And it might sound obvious to you, but I think it's important you articulate it. What's the big serious issue here going on with endangered species?
I just want to quickly touch on what you earlier said. It is so funny if we talk about animals and how you just understand animals. I mean, and all of us, we just understand it. And we're not animal whisperers and, oh, you've got this connection or whatever, but you just understand it. It is sometimes for me so funny that people are taught these sketches. If a wolf's ears are like this, it means this. If a wolf's ears are like that, it means something else. And that's just common sense. It's not something that you need to be taught. And it doesn't matter who of our family it is. They all just know it because you feel it. You just realize it. You just grow up with it. And that helps a great deal. Understanding the essence of animals and why they're part of us, why they're part of nature, why they're part of the bigger picture, the circle of life, and why we're part of them as well. We've got a saying here also in South Africa: if you eaten today, thank a farmer. And so that's very, very important. But every farmer in South Africa is also a conservationist, because he takes care of the land, because he knows that it's where it comes from. And why I'm saying this, because it carries on into your question. Because if we don't have nature, we don't have the genetic diversity, we will also not have a farming population, because we cannot have a monotone environment. We need genetic diversity. So it doesn't matter if you whatever you do as a farmer, if you do maize or you do cattle farming or etc., you need you need diversity, because within that diversity lies the success of nature. Within that success of nature is for me and you to have food on the table. And even if we eat, some people are vegans and some people are carnivores like me, but that's okay. But we need the diversity. At the same time, with wildlife species, within this genetic diversity or diverse population that we have to live within, we have to live alongside each other, but there still needs to be a diversity. And so it doesn't help us removing portions out of nature because we lose that diversity. And that makes part of the circle of life, or the trees, or the tree of life, not the physical tree. And all of that plays a role within an ecosystem. And if we cannot take care of ecosystems, we're not going to have food later on, because again, it comes back to that monotone environment. And so if we have just cabbage, for instance, on thousands and thousands of hectares of land, what else is going to grow on the cabbage? A few bugs and a few birds, but that's about it. I mean, we're losing that. So my idea, whether it is to keep on creating a genetic diversity or a species diversity so that this whole ecosystem stays healthy. And that's very important for a healthy ecosystem. First of all, conservation starts off with habitat protection. You cannot have any conservation without habitat protection. And that's sometimes for me where scientists and conservationists miss each other. The scientists say, oh no, we've got to do this and this and this and this, but they forget about the food that animals has to eat, the grass and the trees and the leaves and whatever. But the conservationist, he says, oh no, we just do habitat protection. But he forgets about how do we multiply the animals? How do we breed the animals? How do we keep them alive, for instance? Yeah. And so we've got all this carbon offsets and carbon that America is producing. That goes through the whole world. I mean, that carbon doesn't just stay over America. It comes to us as well because it's part of the global warming issue. Okay, but coming back to me, so my point is I'm just one of the very small links in the chain, if one can say it, of doing a little bit. Conservation starts with habitat protection. The next thing is animal protection. Okay, but now we have that. How do we multiply the animals that's already endangered, the animals that are already on the critical list? Yes, those two is very critical for their survival. But if we can multiply them, or we can create genetic diversity by moving genetics from one area to the other area through assisted reproduction without having to move the whole animal, taking the animal out of his environment and bringing him to the next environment. So first of all, he loses, or he's got immunity for this environment, so he can get the diseases of the next environment. The other option is he has a disease and he takes it to the newer environment. Yes. Just think about COVID, what we spoke about COVID all this last year. Oh, people are stopping the movement because you can contaminate other people with your COVID, or you can contract COVID on that side. The same with animal diseases. So they are in symbiosis in an environment with their diseases, and they don't die of these diseases because they are happily herd immunity that a lot of people understand. But now we need that genetics to go to another area where they need that genetics. So if we can take semen or embryos or other forms of genetics that does not transmit the disease or can contract the disease. I mean, it just makes such common sense for me that understands it really. And I mean, hopefully after this program, people can understand it better.
Yeah, that's fantastic. You touched on so many very important points, and the first point that I think is definitely worth recalling, which is the conservationist versus the scientists. It sort of reminds me of other analogies, similar examples in other fields, in other industries, where you always have factions who have good intentions and have a mandate to do whatever they need to do, but actually the connectivity and the interrelationship between what one wants to achieve and the other wants to achieve is totally broken, and there isn't one. And I'm sad to hear that exists here as well. So that's one. Where do you put yourself then? Then what are you in this? Are you a scientist? Are you a conservationist? Are you a hybrid?
I'm a hybrid. I'm very, very much a hybrid, and that's so much that becomes again, back to my roots. I mean, being a child of nature, a bushman. I mean, like we grow up in the bush, basically. So I'm a conservationist at heart and at soul and everything. My whole blood pumps conservation. However, how do I achieve it? Through science. It's not wrong. And a lot of time I say to people, it's not the one or the other. It's the one and the other. I mean, yes, communication is so important for the people to marry these two entities and stuff. And so yes, the hybrid is a nice way. And so I just say conservation through science is not wrong.
Right. And when you think about, so when you go back to the example of the genetic example of the herd immunity, the ecosystem, and then you're taking certain, the semen of the animal or whatever other aspects of it, and you're moving it to another ecosystem. Tell me a little bit about sort of the pros and cons of that. What are the implications of that to the wider ecosystem? It cannot just be, well, it's a no-brainer, we should all be doing this all the time. Maybe it is. But what are the two schools of thought there? There's got to be someone who says, absolutely, and someone else who says, totally not, Morne. I mean, what is wrong with you? And so, is there some equilibrium there? Are there ethics involved? How do you draw a line? I just want to understand the pros and cons of this.
That's now creating the herd immunity and the pros and cons about that. That's your question.
Well, the pros and cons of taking, the genetic properties of one, moving it to another ecosystem.
I'll follow. Okay. I think there's not people against it. No one is against it. Everybody say, yeah, you go, boy. We have your back. And yes, we gotta create genetic diversity. There's nobody against it. We gotta save animals. Nobody is against it. Everybody believes it. We gotta save animals. How and the implications and the luxury that we sit in, that stands in the way a lot of times about it's like America that says they will not stop spray cans being used, the luxury lifestyle of them. We're not going to stop flying because the luxury lifestyle, we're not going to use public transport where each one of us will drive in his own car because it touches our luxury, but then quickly, but you guys, you got to protect it. You guys got to do the conservation. You guys got to. So I think that's where the problem lies. So it's not a question of people is against it. Everybody is for it. But and sometimes I also see a feeling that we get in Africa, and that's a feeling and not a fact, and maybe a little bit controversial, so let's throw it on your program, is that we've got the feeling that the European world don't want to change their ways, but if they can throw a lot of money at it, they soothe their conscience a little bit. Okay, I can live this because I've given my $100 to some group or some whatever thing. And then we can sleep well again tonight with our 5-bedroom, 7-flushing toilet, multi-functional electricity, Siri, spoken house, whatever, or Alexa. But then we chuff because we did give $100 to those guys in Africa. But let the money come. I'm not against that. I mean, so I think that's a little bit of a changed answer of your question, but I think that is the essence of it.
Right. And then when you think about the situation that we're dealing with, and you've talked about the ecosystem, you've talked about habitats, you've talked about the implications of habitats being, as you call it, monotone, right? Then adding more diversity and getting to a point where there is greater integration and there's more diversity of species and there's cross-pollination of sorts that you can catalyze, probably the right word, catalyze at this point, then Tell us, what is the, going back to the need and urgency, what is going on the planet with endangered species right now? I mean, some of us know that, certain species are in single digits. Some of us know some have been absolutely wiped out all over the world. I mean, it could be, on land, it could be in the water and so on. There are some very important numbers here, aren't there, that I think it's important you share with us that should shock many of us in terms of the situation of a certain species. And so tell us what you know as to this species is dying out, this is dying out, this is how much is left of this, because I think we need to get our heads around this, don't we?
That is tremendous. I mean, I don't live in the world of endangered species. Okay, so that's not my forte. That's not my my study line. My study line is assisted reproduction. Yet, within that, I know that there's only 2 northern white rhinos left in the world. 2 northern white rhinos. Okay, 2 female. Only way that we ever can multiply them is if we use semen that has been stored through assisted reproductive technology and then do in vitro fertilization on them using the southern white rhino as a surrogate. And the southern white rhino is the most abundant rhino species, of which there's only 10,000 left. Now we think, oh yeah, 10,000 left, that's fantastic. That is an animal that roamed the whole of southern Africa from the equator down to South Africa with 150 to 200,000 rhino, not just a century back. We've got 10,000 left of them. Sumatran and Javan rhino is between 80 and 140 animals each. Indian longhorn is 1,200. Black rhino is 3,000 rhino. So the most abundant rhino species is 10,000. Who will have to act as a surrogate for the animals who's only 2 left. Then we have giant sable. The giant sable is an animal that occurs in Angola, in the war-stricken areas, and where they are being poached daily for bushmeat trade, and I mean that is what it is. There's less than 70 giant sable left in the world. That's an animal who, if you talk to a lot of people, they don't even know about that. The Hirola from Kenya, there's 250 left of them. You have never heard, from the frown on your face, you've never heard of the Hirola from Kenya. Grevy's zebra, which is the most beautiful, bless you, most beautiful zebra in the world. Very fine lines, black and white, white belly, big ears like a donkey. There's between 2 and 2,200 left of them in the world. And forest buffalo, they estimate there must be between 1,000 and 1,200. These are ungulate species that I'm talking about, plus the rhino, the 5 rhino species. And one must understand, within a rhino's biome, the area around a rhino, there's over 300 organisms that's dependent on rhino. So if the rhino species disappear, there's 300 other species that's either got to find another source or somewhere to live, or they just die out. And okay, now we talk about bugs, and we talk about worms, and we talk about stuff that is in their intestines, and all the doo-doos and the insects as well. But it's 300. If one of them then actually can adapt to another environment, to some other species, they will directly be in competition to another species who has this happy medium with another animal. So now they're going to start attacking this other species. So now either they're going to die out, or you're going to cause a massive fight with two different species, just because of one animal, one species that dies out.
Sounds like human beings. and the situation that we're going through on the planet right now.
I tell you, you're talking here about a animal lover. I wouldn't mind a few humans less. Like, don't quote me.
Yeah. That is quite fascinating. And then when you think about the techniques that you're using, I think you've touched on assisted, reproductive techniques and methods and so on. So help us understand. So what happens here? What are you actually doing, and how how repeatable is that process? I guess it might be easier with one animal versus another, or is it like, nope, no issues, got the technique, you get to the animal physically, you work your magic, and off we go. I know it sounds super simplistic, but walk us through how the assisted reproductive method actually works today. Where does it work best? Where does it work not so well, and where is it untested?
Okay, now that is quite easy. Assisted reproductive technologies, or ARTs, or arts as people like to call it, because some say it is an art to be able to do it. Okay, it consists of a few things to get people's idea around it. First of all, artificial insemination. That means semen of the male animal is injected into the female animal, and a lot of people that does not know of it in animals can think about it in a lot in humans, because this is all being used in humans as well. So artificial insemination is being used, so it's not naturally done, and it is artificially done. But the oocyte is produced, or the egg is still produced in the womb of the female animal. The semen is just injected physically into it. Secondly, you also talk about either embryo flushing and embryo transfers, and or in vitro fertilization. So embryo flushing is where the animal itself produces the oocyte. You inject the animal hormones. So instead of one embryo egg produced, there's multiple eggs being produced. That is then fertilized normally by artificial insemination. Couple of days later, that embryos are being flushed out of the cow and then implanted into surrogates. In vitro fertilization is just a little bit sidestep to that, is where the eggs are retrieved out of the female animal, and that is then kept into a test tube, like we talk about test tube babies, or a petri dish. The semen is then taken and then put to that eggs to get fertilization, and then that's being grown in an incubator for a number of days until it reaches an embryo stage. That embryos are then implanted into surrogates or back into the animal itself. Like with humans, humans that can't have children, they go for IVF, test tube babies. The embryo is implanted back into the mother itself, or you can get surrogacy, like in the same with same-sex marriages, for instance. Then you get a surrogate, or one of the two is the carrier. So that's the type of idea. So those are the easy, explainable ones, and the easier ones that are being used worldwide. The next step would be what in layman's terms are called cloning, but it's actually called nuclear transfer. And the idea to explain to people is, you don't make a mini-me. You don't make a big animal, now suddenly it's a small animal. You take a piece of the ear, you take the DNA out of that piece of the ear, you put it into an empty egg. So meaning, like, if it's the egg yolk, the DNA is being taken out, and you implant that DNA into that. And then you grow that embryo then. So you hoax that oocyte or egg that it's fertilized with the DNA from the donor animal. And then that thing, that embryo is then grown until embryo stage. That then is implanted into a surrogate, and a baby is born. A small calf is born as not a mini-me, and it's like a twin, and that's it. Doesn't have any connection to the donor. It has no connections like vibes or anything, nothing whatsoever. It's just twinning. It's just literally like a twin. like naturally what happens in the womb, you get identical twins, they split into two and then they each grow. This is twinning that's being created 9 or 10 or 15 or whatever years later. And then the next step of somewhere where we are not yet, but that is also part of things that scientists are working on the future. It's called induced pluripotent stem cells. So we understand stem cells that can be formed into any cell type, and but that you normally get out of the bone marrow or the umbilical cord, or an embryo is also a stem cell. But now you can take a skin cell and you chemically induce it to become a pluripotent stem cell. So the research that we do for saving the species is also research that we do in terms of stem cell research for treating diseases even in humans. I mean, so this whole research is also interlinked with a lot of other stuff as well. So you do research to save the species, but that stem cell research for causing induced pluripotent stem cells can be transpolated to humans, to making stem cells to help people that have had a heart attack, for instance, or infarct in the heart. So there are other uses as well for these technologies. So basically, if we then take those techniques, first of all, I talked about genetic diversity. So you get, because there's no migratory patterns anymore, because of roads, fences, borders that have been created between countries, there's no migration. There's huge cities in between. So in South Africa, Southern Africa, we talk about the east-west migration, and in East Africa, we talk about the northeast migration that needs to take place, of which the Great Migration of the wildebeest or the News is an example. So if there was fences in the Masai Mara, that migration would not have taken place. That animals would have died out during the drier months. Boom. That's an example. Okay. But now we get these pockets. The bongo. Oh, I didn't even mention that as an endangered species. There's only between 22 and 27 wild bongo left in the world. And they're in 3 different forests in Kenya. And the Mount Kenya one is already completely extinct, the wild population. But now, for there's in Florida, in the States, and in Texas, there's a lot of mountain bongo left. If we take that bongo from Florida and we take it to Mount Kenya, which they've done, and then they release it into the park, all those animals die. Every single one of them. And the reason is they have no resistance to the diseases. But they've got genetics, which is valuable for the genetic diversity of those 27 between 27 animals. So if we can take semen from them, inseminate through artificial insemination into this population, we can create genetic diversity within this 22 animals. That 22 animals will then suddenly having a new genetic line that makes them stronger type animals, which have hybrid vigor. And we talk a lot in the animal world about hybrid vigor, which is important for survival. Another example is in Zimbabwe, they have the Zimbabwean black rhino. And in South Africa, we've got the black rhino, which is called the southern black rhino, which are ecotypes, difference of each other. But if we take the South African black rhino to bring them into Zimbabwe, they struggle to sustain the bad nutrition of Zimbabwe. So that Zimbabwean animal is a hardier animal. But they depleted because of poaching, seriously depleted. So they need new animals and new genetics. So you cannot just have the bull and the bull's son jumping and mating with the mother and the sister, and then the next generation, they just keep on mating with each other's genetics. and brothers on sisters and fathers on daughters and whatever. So you need new genetics. And if we can move those genetics through assisted reproduction, you produce a genetic diversity, you're making stronger, bigger, better animals that can sustain either the harsh conditions or the environment much, much better. Even if you do move an animal and it can survive, that animal, if it's a bull, and here you have a herd of, let's call it bongo again, but this bull has to dominate this group of other bongos, but he's not used to exertion of dominance to this animals in this habitat. So he will stay separate and they will stay separate. So he will never infuse his genetics because of hierarchy, because of herding instinct or lack thereof. And so the uses of this assisted reproduction just in the wild for causing genetic diversity is there. Now we talk about extinct animals like the Northern White Rhino. The only way to get that Northern White Rhino back to life again is to do in vitro fertilization with that last two Northern White Rhino with semen of the 7 different bulls whose semen was stored. Now we talk about banking of genetics. Fortunately, some wise people, scientists, crazy scientists, bank that genetics. That genetics now can save those Northern White Rhino. Even today, I say, let's save impala, buffalo, all abundant species. Let's save their genetics because we don't know when an epidemic strikes or something happens to the population. But when we have these genetics saved, we can bring back the genetics from a frozen, what we call a frozen ark or a banked population of genetics. We can literally bring back that genetics to protect us from inbreeding of these animals. And so yes, just here in a nutshell, I've given you a whole lot of examples how this technology can help us do conservation. Next part of your question, the sustainability of this and the how long do you go ahead with it? Once you have given a rebirth to the population, you have introduced genetic diversity through conservation of habitat protection, animal protection, but now you have created this vibrant population. It can go on by itself. So it doesn't have to be an intervention over and over and over and over again. The only intervention that comes is that we must stop killing them. That is an intervention. But we don't have to repeatedly do this technology. Ease of the technology, also one of your questions was, it has been sorted out for cattle and domestic animals quite a lot. It's easy to work with these animals and to do it over and over again and until you are successful. It was done in cattle. Eventually, it was then done in humans as well. And so it can be transpolated, and there's a little bit of parallelism from the one species to the next species. But for instance, rhino is completely different. So you cannot use any one of these species that has already been discovered. The technology has been discovered. You cannot use that as an example. Yes, IVF can be done with this technique, but what media do you use? What technology do you use? And to multiply the genetics or to be successful at this, that's all got to be discovered. And even the tools that we work with, that's got to be designed and discovered. And like the rhino that we work with, first of all, where is the ovaries in a rhino? You cannot Google that. You cannot go onto a platform and say, where is you will not find it as top of the questions in Google. And you got to discover it. You got to find it in the rhino. And it's a 2-ton animal. that is 4 meters long and 1.5 meter wide and 1.5 meter high if it's lying down. And yes, the ovaries are in there somewhere. Secondly, what apparatus do you use? No, we just order it on Amazon, 48-hour delivery. No, it doesn't work that way. You've got to design and develop it all by yourself. You can have nowhere where people can tell you that just use this or just use that technology. So every species, and for every species, you've got to basically design apparatus. You've got to design a protocol on how to do this and how to do that. And that's something I said 20 years back. I said, let's work on impala, let's work on abundant buffalo. And then people said to me, yeah, but they're not rare.
Right.
Now we are working with rare sable and we are working with rare white rhino. If we did that 20 years ago when they were abundant, we would have been able now to save them. So for me, there needs to be a lot done, not only on the endangered species, there needs to be a lot done on the abundant species, because we don't know what's happening 20 years, 50 years, 100 years down the line. We didn't know that the Russians is going to infiltrate Ukraine last year.
Do you think, I mean, this is a beautiful summary. I mean, I've taken some notes as well because it's an education. Do you believe if you think about the factors that affect an ecosystem, right? You touched on a few horrible ones like poaching and so on. And then infrastructure. That's a really interesting observation as we've divided land and commercialized and built and built and built and built for all of the reasons human beings know they like to build things for. That's also had a massive effect, a negative effect on migration, and no one really thinks about it, of course, ever. And are there other aspects of the climate change sort of after effects that you're seeing as a hybrid conservationist and scientist that are having massive negative impacts on species that you should tell us about?
For me, human intervention, human progress. We like to call it progress the whole time because we have a faster car, we have a better car, we're progressing. We have bigger houses, so we make progress. And for me, that is the biggest downfall of animals, without a doubt. Any single bit of the so-called claim to make progress is having a negative impact on animals, on wildlife, on conservation efforts for that matter. Yes, we are using that now also, that same progress we're using to save the animals, which I agree with. But the animals wouldn't have been in that state if we have not had these metropolitan cities. And yes, there's few animals that adapt to it. I mean, some birds breed in the rooftops, and we think of owls and swallows and sparrows. I mean, yes, they've adapted certain cat species, and but we look at India and all the leopards that are being killed that invades the cities and start catching the dogs in the cities, and then later the humans and interrupts. And so these poor animals are being maybe rightfully killed because a human life is more important than that animal's life. I don't want to make a judgment on that if that's the right way to say it. But yes, that is what happens. And but the understanding that we must truly understand that we have caused this and we are causing it on a day-to-day basis. We need to do something to turn it back. Yeah, we're not going to stop. We're not going to break down the city. Definitely not. That I agree with. We got to stay within the city idea and whatever. We're not going to go back 400 years or 500 years and we're just going to wear skins and walk bare feet. That's not going to happen. So what do we do now to turn back what we have available? How do we have what we have available and optimize it for the sake of prosperity, for the sake of what I started off with calling it genetic diversity?
I mean, I think you've touched on such important points, and I think the way you've articulated, I guess this is your life journey, and you've in very short space of time articulated the journey of the artificial or the assistive reproductive process. I mean, I have these 4 bullet points around, artificial insemination, embryo flushing, vitro fertilization, cloning, nuclear transfer, and the stem cell aspect of it, which it's great to hear that. It's great to hear that there is this segmentation and there's this level of optionality available. Before I close the session with you, because of course we could talk for hours about this, it's such a deep topic, I just want to ask you 1 or 2 questions, important questions. The first one is related to this concept of it's a human problem of resistance and agendas and politics. And I would be naive if I was to think that everything you're saying is just really, well, let's just get on and do it, and it's really simple now because you've articulated it. What is holding this whole thing back? And maybe I'm asking an obvious question, but it's important you say it. So what is stopping us from doing everything you've said today for human factors?
Unfortunately, politics. About how do I survive in my environment as a human being, and how do I help? That type of politics. Of course, finances is really, really, really important. I mean myself, I'm self-funded. I mean, it's ridiculous why I'm self-funded, because I'm really trying to save this stuff for prosperity. So yes, I don't have this angle that a lot of guys with the right political connections, and I'm not talking about party politics. I'm sometimes talking about conservation politics or connections or the right angle that they use. And I'm just a vet. I'm just a reproduction specialist. That's all I am. I don't have a platform where I can entice people with major sentimental things to say donate money. The problem is my world of assisted reproduction is not charismatic. It's not. It is a little bit over the top for a lot of people, and but a rhino orphan is really charismatic. We have to help this rhino orphan. So it's easy to splurge money into that group, and people have to, because that rhino orphans need you. But it's easy. But if I tell them, listen, the only way that rhino orphan is going to get pregnant is if I do my technology on that rhino orphan, then you go, boy, you make that one pregnant. Okay, but help. No, sorry, you're on your own. The same thing with poached rhino as well. Seeing that animal being hacked to death and smelling that absolute death in the air. If you're next to you can see whatever pictures you like to see and show around the world. You can never experience it. Standing next to that poached dead rhino, the birds in the air is not twittering. There's death in the air. There's a smell in the air. It is shocking. But yes, also the people see it. It is so a lot goes for anti-poaching, etc., etc. So it makes that first line of getting over the politics difficult, because then people first got to understand, listen, this is actually also touching me, even if I'm in America or even if I'm in Europe. it does touch me as well as a human being, because it's part of the bigger picture, part of life. The second line of that, now the guy is over that. Where do I spend the money? And a shocking result that is unfortunate. They did a survey or looking at people asking for money for conservation efforts, and they found 110 platforms where people doesn't have a foot on the ground, but they ask for money. So that means it's hoaxes. So it's not real people behind it. It's not people like you and me, real people. It's a platform, and then they get donations because they've got this wonderful website. So those are issues, and then the other issue is really understanding what is the issue. Really understanding, like we started off with you asking me, just tell me quickly, what is this, where we are with endangered species, and how people are divorced from that understanding, which makes programs like this so valuable, because you're really getting out there to the people and telling them, this is what's happening today, people. We got to have a concerted effort, and we don't leave it to the Leonardo DiCaprios. Every one of us plays a role.
Yeah. That's very powerful. I think, what you've shared with us today, Morne, is a very important message for all of us, people who are connected or not connected to the work that you're doing, to do something material, at a minimum, to be aware. At StraightTalk, we talk about accelerating awareness. Sometimes that translates to action. Other times it doesn't always translate to action. What it does do, though, is enables one person to spread the message to the other spread it to the other, and that network effect of a more consistent message around, well, actually, it is a problem. And yes, it is buried with the same issues that any great solution will be buried with: politics and bureaucracy and charlatans and fake websites, or websites that aren't actually, enabled with people on the ground. And actually the real workers, the real doers in the trenches like yourself, unfortunately, very often don't get the coverage, don't get the recognition, and forget even the recognition, don't get the coverage, and therefore don't get the resources. And so our job today, and why I wanted to bring you onto the show, is, we're privileged to have your incredible knowledge and the depth of knowledge, but actually the way you've articulated it, it's enabled many people to understand it. And you've talked about a lot of important points today, Morne, and our job and our duty is to cascade this to as many people as possible. But our work is obviously definitely not done. So what do you believe is your core message to even those who are not in conservation, those who are not scientists trying to figure out the next method to drive reproduction in an endangered species? What should the layperson be doing at this point in terms of our small bit? It's important we know. What would you say to someone? What should we do to help you?
I'm an extremely strong believer in everything that you can do positive helps. Doesn't matter in what small percentage. People were flushing toilets and they put a brick in the back of the toilet so that they save 1 liter every time they flush, is doing their bit. I'm a very strong believer in doing it where you can, where you are, and what bit you can do. If you can save one bird in a sky that can fly from one area to the other area, that can feed another animal somewhere else, you've done your bit. And I mean, we've got so many billion people in the world. So if every one person gives $1, we've got so many $billion, but meaning not dollar as not necessarily the dollar in rand in dollar value, the doing their bit. And the Chinese proverb that goes, every long journey starts with the first step. Take that first step. because then you can go onto the journey, your journey. And because my journey is different. I mean, I know what my journey is. I mean, I'm passionate about my journey, and I know I've said it on some platforms as well, and I use it a lot. I might fail, but I'll never give up. I will die trying. And if I don't succeed, my children will succeed. And that's the attitude that we have to have. Yes, it is bad, and it is, this is negative and that's negative. No, but it's not all doom and gloom, because there's people like you. After what you're doing, the fact that you are bringing message out to people, that is your calling. That is where you play a role. I mean, the invaluableness about what you're doing is so impressive. Because yes, you can't get onto the plane and now you save 10 elephants somewhere, or you can't get onto the plane and take a few anti-poachers or poachers down. No. You have a calling with your skill set, that what you are doing, and getting the message out there. And so that for me is the message. Do as much as you can, but start doing where you are, what you can do with passion. I mean, I say you do everything you do with passion. Even if you sleep with passion, but do everything properly, and then you will reach, you will achieve. And I mean, the goals that you're working at for in school or in the world or whatever, with your family or whatever, just do it. And I don't want to quote a famous Nike brand, but yeah, just do it, man. And but get out there and be passionate about it. I've been hitting my head against the brick wall over and over and over again with this rhino reproduction stuff that we do. And but it's fabulous, because tomorrow I might break through that wall. But if I don't do it, I'll never get through that wall. We must also remember a watch, an analog watch that stands still, is twice a day it's correct. So it doesn't mean if you stand still and you're twice a day correct, you are correct, or you're moving.
Yeah.
A boat that moves make waves.
Yes.
Only dead fish swim downstream.
Yeah. I mean, I think you've summed it up beautifully, and thank you for everything you've said about Straight Talk. And I was going to ask you what your feedback is on the session. I think you've already kindly shared that, and that means a lot to me and to the entire team. We're trying to do our bit. And this episode that we've recorded, I also want to tell you and the viewers, this is extraordinary, because we've not really touched on this subject at all. I've done nearly 100 shows with 100 amazing people, with 100 amazing stories and 100 amazing life experiences. And this is the first time we've touched on this topic, and I felt it was important to do it. It's outside of the norm of what we talk about, and that is why it's important we do it, because it's about the protection of civilization and the ecosystem that we so value. And when I first spoke to you, I remember you telling me that this endeavor, like your purpose, the passion that comes from your purpose, and then the perseverance that's so obvious in your entire body language and your way of speaking, is inspiring for people in whatever they do in their lives. This is one walk of life, but people could be trying to do a breakthrough, some scientific breakthrough in another walk of life. I'm trying to do this, where I'm trying to democratize the acceleration of awareness. I'm trying to say not everyone, not only a small group of elitists should have access to privileged knowledge. Those days are gone. Now, with the internet and these platforms, everyone should know about these issues. And no one should feel like, well, I haven't got the IQ to listen to Straight Talk and Dr. Morné talk about cloning. Oh my God, it sounds too far out. I'm not smart enough. Absolutely not. And I think I'll borrow your points as to, the action, whatever tiny bit of action it may be. It could even be a repetition of this call and this show with another person. And it could be that person repeating it to another, and then they say, hey, I didn't know anything about the the fact that we only had 2 of these rhinos left. I didn't know anything about the fact that, wow, a lot of the techniques used in with animals is mimicking what we're using with human beings. I didn't know that this could be possible, and it's being done, and etc, etc. So I've taken so much away from today, and I am grateful for the time you've given me and what you've shared with us. We will keep in touch for sure, and I'd love to make sure that the entire Straight Talk community of thousands of followers and viewers understand this. You may have to come back again at some point, if that's okay, to break down your progress over the next 6 months or a year. But thank you so much for your time, Morné. Thank you for your passion to save the planet and save species that affect other species. The one that affects the 300, again, a lot of people don't think about that. And long may your work continue, and thank you for your time. And is there anything you want to say before we close off about this experience very quickly?
Just thank you so much. I mean, for me, it really is an honor. And I mean, I'm just a little guy here in Africa trying to do my hardest, and being able to be on such a famous platform and tell a little bit of my story and my thoughts, I really appreciate it. And I really would invite people. I've got a platform called Rhino Repro, for obvious reasons, and which is on social media, which some students run for me, and go and follow us. Be aware of what we do and be part of our journey. I mean, I'd love you to be part of the journey that we go through, and every positive word that people say under in the thing, I read every single one of them, and I thank people for the support. So thank you very, very much.
Yeah, my pleasure. Rhino Repro, we'll publish all of this when we get the episode released as well, and hopefully you're on social media or LinkedIn, because we'd need you to actually share it with your community as well, so we can get the message out as far and wide as possible. Thank you so much for today. For our guests and our Straight Talkers, please go onto our channel on YouTube, click like, subscribe to the channel, get on LinkedIn, even go onto our website, straighttalk.live, www.straighttalk.live, join our community. And if you want to get hold of Morné, if you can't find him, then come to us, info@straighttalk.live. We'll connect you. There could be resources out there, Morné, there could be money, there could be support out there. So we will make sure that's channeled to you wherever possible. Thank you so much. I'll sign off today, and have a wonderful day ahead. Thank you to my Straight Talkers and to everyone who's been helping our cause and our mission.